What's up, everyone? Monster Master Godzilla here, and I'm here to continue the Spider-Man-A-Thon. We're now up to Spider-Man 3. Now, this one, this is one that I saw in the theaters when I was a kid. I was 12 years old when it came out in the theaters. And it was 2007. And now, this one, when it was released in the theaters, this is regarded by some audiences to be the worst of the Spider-Man movies, which I can understand why. I mean, don't get me wrong, I liked it. I enjoyed this movie. It's split whether you love it or you hated it. A lot of people hated it. I'm on the love side of this movie. I mean, there's lots of things that I say you can fix this movie. The plot involves that citizens now really love Spidey, and we introduce like Gwen Stacy, and a few things that are a little off. There are a few things that are way off the comic book, way out of the comic book. Now they introduce three different villains. Harry Osborn becomes the Green Goblin, the second Green Goblin after Norman came around as a hallucination in the mirror, saying "Avenge me," all because that Harry was convinced that Peter killed Spider-Man's dad, all because Harry was convinced that Peter killed Norman, which he never did. And Mary Jane is now a star, a singer in the Broadway. And the worst thing is that, and now while Peter and Mary Jane were still in the relationship, while they were having their moment kissing, an alien meteor came down and crash landed on Earth, and he ended up following Peter throughout the beginning of the film. And there's also a villain. The other villain includes the Sandman, like Flint Marko, aka the Sandman, and he was a wanted fugitive. And yes, in the comic book, well, there's one change that was happening that they changed from the Sandman. There's a few things that they changed on the Sandman, which is not like from the comic book. Interesting thing is, in the movie, the Sandman had a family, a wife, and a daughter, and his daughter was sick and dying, and they made him a character you end up feeling sympathy for. They made him a villain that you end up feeling sorry for, all because his daughter was sick and dying. And he wasn't robbing, and he wasn't making robberies just for the sake of robbering. While in the comic book, the Sandman was just a regular thug with no family. And his real name wasn't really Flint Marko. His birth name was William Baker, but goes by Flint Marko, like an alias where no one can find him. And then Flint Marko ends up, while he was escaping from the cops, he went into a machine that had sand, and it mutated his body, causing him to turn his body into sand. Hence the name the Sandman. So, and he made a promise to his daughter that he'll make her healthy again. Her daughter was sick and dying. He was trying to find a cure for his daughter. So he ends up stealing money so he can collect all the money so he can get his daughter healthy again. So Harry goes after Peter and tries to kill him. Peter, in the movie, he was called New Goblin, but in the storyline, Harry actually did become the second Green Goblin in the comics. Which, that's when Peter Parker and Harry Osborn are best friends turned enemies. Which, that was sad. Because we saw them as best friends from before, and now they're enemies, going against each other. Which that actually happened in the comic book, where Peter Parker and Harry Osborn become best friends turned enemies. So, but the one thing I definitely was great was, I did like how they made Harry making him the second Green Goblin after Norman Osborn. But the costume could have been a little different. Like, the mask part feels like very generic, like he's from the future. And he's riding a surfboard, and he's riding a flying hoverboard, instead of like an actual glider like his dad. So yeah, it could have been a little different. And so then, when Harry tries to kill Peter, but then when he got knocked out and got some serious injury, he ended up losing memory. And ended up going to a hospital. And ended up losing memory from that. So then Spider-Man ends up meeting, when he ends up meeting Gwen Stacy, he rescues Gwen Stacy from a collapsing building. And we introduce George Stacy, who is known to be Spider-Man's allies in the comics. And he's just a minor character in this film. And also the one thing is about and also the Sandman was played by Thomas Hayden Church. And while this time they introduced Eddie Brock, which played by Topher Grace, which he's kind of gotten he had a controversial choice of actor. A lot of people, myself included, were not fond of him in this film. I mean, here's what my opinions are about Eddie Brock, about Topher Grace and Eddie in Spider-Man 3, which we will get to later. So, after Peter ends up rescuing Gwen, and that's one thing that's most inaccurate to the comic book, Eddie Brock and Gwen Stacy, they were never a couple in the comics. That was just bullshit and made up for the movie. Kind of like how Peter is dating Mary Jane, which another bullshit thing is that they changed is that in the comic book Peter dated Gwen Stacy before dating Mary Jane, while in the movie they reversed it, which that's total bullshit. And that's why they kind of rival it together. And also, Gwen was supposed to be dead after Peter dated Mary Jane. Is supposed to be dead when Peter dated Mary Jane. So then one day, and there was a moment where Peter was supposed to. And supposedly Peter got an engagement ring. And they were supposed to, and Peter was supposed to like ask Mary Jane to marry him, which that would have been so awesome of an ending, which I'll explain to that later. So then Peter ends up giving a reward after Spider-Man became key of the city by Gwen Stacy. All because he saved Gwen Stacy, and he's the Captain Stacy's daughter, and wanted to show gratitude. They declared Spider-Man as key to the city. So he ended up kissing. Spider-Man ends up kissing Gwen Stacy, right in front of Mary Jane, and Mary Jane was frowned upon Mary Jane. So that's when the relationship kind of got a little unhealthy, and things kind of caused a conflict between the two of them. So it's when they almost started parting ways. So then one day, Peter and Aunt May end up getting a call from the police, and they end up finding out who who the real killer is. And they found out the criminal from the first film, Dennis Carradine, was actually not the killer. Was not actually Uncle Ben's killer. So it turns out he was a partner to Flint Marko. It turns out Flint Marko is the one who shot Uncle Ben, and he got away. And Peter ends up being so mad that he ends up realizing that he went after the wrong man. He realized that he found the wrong man. And then before he was getting ready to go out as Spider-Man, he ends up laying down in the bed. And right when he got on the bed, the black suit got on to him. And the black suit went on Spidey, and he ends up forming new abilities to it. And this is what the black suit looked like right here on the reflection with Spidey. And this is the full appearance of the black suit right here. And he ends up having look like this later on. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So Peter ends up realizing he got the black suit, which he was like, he ends up feeling so amazed. And it used to be his favorite suit in the comic book. He's like, he realized something is different, like the amount of power it has. Like, it increased his strength. Supposedly in the comic book, it was a symbiote suit. The symbiote is really an alien parasite which would take over your mind in the comic book. So he ends up meeting Doc Connors, and Dr. Connors realized what the symbiote really is. So Peter finds Flint Marko and ends up going after him in the black suit Spider-Man. Oh yeah, but in the first bat encounter as Spider-Man, he didn't have the black suit on, but he had a funny moment when he caught the Sandman going after robbing the armored cars. He wasn't robbing the armored cars for the sake of robbing the armored cars. He wanted money. So that's when he showed up on the armored car saying, "Jigs up, pal." And the Sandman was like, "I don't want to hurt you." And he said, and that's when Spider-Man made a joke saying, "Are you kidding me? I'm the sheriff around these parts." So that's when they had their first fight. Also, the fight when Peter, in the scene where Peter ends up when Spider-Man fights the Sandman for the first time, this scene right here this scene right here where Spider-Man punches a hole through the Sandman, Sam Raimi actually wanted to use less CGI, so he hired an amputee for a practical effect to punch a hole through the Sandman. That's when Peter realized he made out of sand. So, that's pretty much that one. And in the second battle, Spider-Man ends up confronting him in the black suit, in the sewers, against the Sandman. And so the Sandman ends up using water, and then in the sewers, Spider-Man realized that being that he has power of sand, his weakness was water, where he turns into mud. And so he destroys him with the water. And then when Spider-Man goes back to being Peter Parker, he ends up looking like this. Yeah, this little emo Peter Parker. Which in the internet they made fun of it in memes, call him Bully Maguire, which it's very funny in a way where he has some funny lines in there. I'll explain later there. And so he had some moments where the black suit changed him, like when he was with his landlord, Mr. Dickovich, which the Dickovich was actually a nod to the Spider-Man comic book creator, Steve Ditko. And Stan Lee, who made cameos in all 3 of the Spider-Man movies, is the co-creator. Steve Ditko is the creator of Spider-Man, while Stan Lee is the co-creator, but Stan gets all the credit as the creator. Just so you know. And when he had a moment where where Mr. Dickovich tries to collect rent from Peter. Peter snapped at Mr. Dickovich, saying, "You'll get your rent when you fix this damn door." Which, ooh, that triggered me there. I was like, whoa, Peter. It's most unlike Peter Parker. Yeah, the black suit is taking over his mind. So they're on. So after then, so here's what I learned that, and then one day, Peter tries to, so then when he meets up with Harry Osborn, again, and they get into a fight in the comics, again, after Harry ends up regaining his memory. Again. And so Peter and Harry ends up fighting again after Harry forced MJ to break up with Peter. So then after that the Peter ends up then Peter ends up fighting Harry one last time, and he had a moment where he says, "Oh, look at little Goblin Jr. You gonna cry?" He even said some hateful stuff like saying, "No, Norman despised you. You're an embarrassment to him." "Oh, look at little Goblin Jr. You gonna cry?" he says. So then the battle ended when Harry tries throwing the pumpkin bomb at Peter, and then Peter spun the web and threw it back at him, causing Harry to causing a scar and go blind in one eye. So then Peter ends up walking through the streets, and he ended up realizing people saw the newspapers as Spider-Man robbing banks. And so then he realized Eddie Brock was behind it. And he thought, "I'm going to put some dirt in your eye." And so then he realized the photos of the black suit Spider-Man, and it looks similar. So he found out it's taken from. So it turns out the photo that Eddie made was actually taken from an old photo of Spider-Man, and it was photoshopped with the black suit, and puts the bag of money on there. So he says, "You're trash, Brock." And he says, "Want forgiveness? Get religion," he says. So then Eddie Brock was fired, and then Bugle was forced to forgive, say they're sorry. Even Peter says to Jameson, "You want the photos? I'll get the staff, double the money." So yeah, the black suit changed him, wanted it all, and he got greedy, having power to himself. So that's when he was like flirting with girls. He ended up flirting with girls a lot too, and became a completely different person after he went all emo Peter Parker. So he ends up later taking Gwen Stacy to a jazz club, and where he watches Mary Jane perform. So he ends up putting on a show and dancing around, and he had even had a quiet moment where he says like this, "Now dig on this," and dancing around and shit. And so it turns out it's all for Mary Jane. He tried to win Mary Jane over, but it didn't work out. So he ends up getting into a fight with people in the club, and then Mary Jane tries to stop him, but Peter ends up hitting her instead. And then Peter realized what he has done is wrong. He says, I don't know who I am anymore." So then Peter ends up swinging away, and you see him in the black suit one last time, standing like this. And he ends up going to the church to get rid of the black suit. And Eddie Brock happened to be there. And so Peter ends up getting rid of the black suit, ripping the black suit off, and he ended up hitting a church bell. And it turns out, like the comic book, symbiotes are vulnerable to fire and sonic. So it didn't like high frequency noises, especially from the church bell. So he got rid of the black suit. It landed on Eddie Brock. Eddie Brock ends up seeing Peter Parker, finding out that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. So then the black suit landed on Eddie Brock, and it turned him into Venom. Now, yeah, like the comic book, Eddie Brock was fired from the Daily Bugle after Spider-Man realized the truth behind him. So it ruined his reputation. One thing they left out in the comic book is that, Eddie Brock went through a divorce from his wife, Anne Wang. He ended up going to church for forgiveness, and he had thoughts of committing suicide. But this time he was saying that he's wishing that he would want Peter Parker to die. But he ends up getting the black suit on Peter from Peter Parker. But in the comic book, he gets the black suit. It landed on Peter Parker, and the black suit knows who Spider-Man really is. And usually the black suit is supposed to be like a separate entity, and that's when it turned him into Venom. And now here's the thing which is kind of pissing people off. Spider-Man 3 crammed too many villains in one movie. Venom wasn't supposed to be in Spider-Man 3. Sam Raimi didn't want Venom in Spider-Man 3. He had no intention of putting Venom in Spider-Man 3. But the studio forced him to do it, and technically Spider-Man 3 was ruined by studio interference. So basically Venom was shoehorned into the film, and he had no purpose being in Spider-Man 3. He was just in there for selling toys. So bottom line, Spider-Man 3 is actually good if you cut all that scenes with Venom out of the film and just leave it with Harry Osborn as the Green Goblin and the Sandman. So after Peter got rid of the black suit, he ends up going home to relax in the shower, and he ends up talking to Aunt May, and you realize what they're done with Mary Jane. He says that it was too soon to ask Peter to marry. So yeah, that also kind of pissed me off. That they had the opportunity to have Peter Parker ask Mary Jane to marry him, but they threw that away. That would have been a much better ending than what we got. So then the Sandman returns, and it turns out the Sandman survived the sewer battle. And then when the Sandman finds Venom, he mistook him for Spider-Man, because it's the same black suit. And then Venom reveals himself. He talks to him, and that's one thing that's kind of dumb. It's revealed that they didn't get Venom's voice right. It kind of made him sound very wimpy, even as Venom. And that's they really butchered Venom badly in this movie. So they made him feel very underutilized. Yeah, so Venom's so underutilized, and they really butchered the character. He had no purpose being in the film. So for Topher Grace, my opinion, honestly, I liked him better as Eddie Brock. And he's not a good Venom. I mean, I don't really just see Venom when he's in that role. All I see is his character he's just not that good of a character. He's just not fit. He's just not right for the role. I mean, he did good in his own way. I mean, just wasn't right for the role. He's just not good as Eddie Brock. He's not a good Venom, but a better Eddie Brock. So then the Sandman and Venom. So then Sandman and Venom and Sandman kidnapped Mary Jane, and Peter realizes that Mary Jane's in trouble. So Peter ends up going back to wearing his classic red suit. So and then he ends up trying to get Harry for help, but Harry refuses to cooperate at first. So then Peter ends up taking on Spider-Man and ends up taking on Venom and the Sandman alone. But because it didn't go as planned as he hoped. I mean, like the comic book, Venom did give Spider-Man a hard time while fighting, especially when it's the black suit. And so, just when... And one thing they definitely butchered the Sandman is that they made him cheesy. Where he got so big that he lost his ability to talk. Which, that's so dumb. Where he's like... And that's it. He didn't really say anything while he's big. Which, that's dumb. And Spider-Man was having a... Well, just when you thought Spider-Man was going to die from that battle, Harry ends up joining the battle, finally shows up, coming to his senses, and after he found the truth from his butler, Bernard, finding out that Norman actually did die, actually did kill himself with the glider. So he found out Peter never really did kill Norman Osborn. So then Harry ends up putting aside how he felt about Peter and helped his once best friend. And they both team up to fight Sandman and Venom. And during the final battle, the Sandman was defeated at first. And then Spider-Man and Venom had their final confrontation. And it's revealed and then Harry ends up getting killed by Venom, ends up getting stabbed by the glider, just like Norman did with his own glider. So, except Venom actually kills Harry with the glider. Unlike the opposite, where Spider-Man just dodges the glider and only to have Norman kill himself. So Spider-Man ends up defeating the Venom by having him trapped inside like a cage and uses high frequency sounds when he realized when he remembered the black suit is vulnerable to high frequency sounds. So he got Eddie Brock out of it, and just when Eddie Brock was supposed to get back into it, Venom ends up using Peter ends up using one of Harry's pumpkin bombs to blow up the Venom suit. And so Eddie ends up tries going into the black suit again, only to get himself killed with the black suit. And they also revealed that it's also shown that the symbiotes don't like fire either. They burn and die from it. And so Venom is defeated, but the Sandman's lived. And just when Harry was dying, Harry ends up finally forgiving Peter Parker for what happened. And so they made up. And he said, "You're my best friend, Peter." And stuff. And so Harry finally dies. And then the Sandman shows up. And he talks to Peter about what really happened. He says that he tried to steal Uncle Ben's car. And he said he wanted your money. But Uncle Ben tries talking him out of things. But Marco was able to cooperate with Uncle Ben. But his partner came in. But then his partner, Dennis Carradine, also known as the Carjacker, ends up coming in, and then Norman, and then all of a sudden, right when his partner came in, it turns out that Flint's hand slipped, and he accidentally did it by accident. So that it turns out that Flint actually accidentally did it, but he ran away out of guilt, all because the gun was in his hand. And he asked Peter for forgiveness. And Peter did. Because he was still wanted fugitive, he ends up flying away. He ends up disappearing, and he was never seen again after that, or until later on in the film, which we will get to later. And so Harry dies, and they end up having a funeral for him. And of course, and then later in the film, at the very end, Peter and Mary Jane finally rekindled their relationship. ended up rebuilding their relationship, and they got back together. And one thing that kind of pissed me off, that's one thing that kind of pissed me off about Peter and Mary Jane. The way they had the opportunity to have Peter ask Mary Jane to marry him, and they threw that away. That would have been a much better, that would have been a much better ending than what we got. That would have been a perfect ending for Spider-Man 3, but they butchered that, and due to studio interference. So, if you're a casual moviegoer, I would say you don't have to watch this, but if you're, and I mean, you can, it's split whether you like it or hate it. I mean, I definitely recommend it for entertainment, but I mean, if you want some entertainment, go for it, but otherwise stay away from this movie, especially since this one's one of the weaker Spider-Man movies. But there are better Spider-Man movies than this one. There are plenty of others that are better. And as always, you gotta, or if you're definitely a hardcore Spider-Man fan and you have the money to spare, grab this in your collection. You can have it and grab this in your collection. And that's all I have to say, folks, and stay tuned for more. And next we'll be doing The Amazing Spider-Man. And as always, stay awesome, my Monster Masters, and I'll catch you later. Bye!